But first, relief today for homeowners with a mortgage. The Reserve Bank today said no more rise in interest rates, or at least not this month. 12 rate rises in just over a year is enough for now. In fact, though, it might be enough for the rest of the year because Reserve Bank Governor Lowe didn't seem keen today on any more rises. He said the past rate rises working, inflation had passed its peak, and any further hikes depended on how the economy and inflation evolve. Wait and see. Joining me is economist Professor Gigi from the University of New South Wales. Professor Foster, thanks for your time. The Reserve Bank today decided not to lift interest rates again, or at least not this month. Did it do the right thing?
I reckon it probably did. Interestingly, only one of our four big banks was predicting that there would be a pause in rate rises. But if you look at some of the signs that I'm sure Lowe and his council were looking at, I can understand why they'd want to keep things steady. For one thing, we still have yet to see a feed through of the previous rate rises to the various beleaguered homeowners who are now paying up to 50% more on their mortgage payments per month. And that needs some time to work through. And also, even though labor signals seem to be very, very strong, very hot. The labor market is tight. There's a large number of hours being worked. The employment to population ratio is very strong. We have low unemployment rate. There is also a real problem with productivity. And I think probably the bank is interested in just waiting around for another month and seeing what happens. As Lowe said in his statement, there is a great deal of economic uncertainty, which is not that surprising, given that the government has created over the last few years an environment of uncertainty for economic actors in the labor market and in many other sectors. And so I think there is a logic to keeping rates steady at the moment and seeing how things go in the next month, particularly because inflation has been coming down.
Well, he did say in that statement, inflation has passed its peak. The rate cuts so far are working. Does this mean inflation is being beaten, as he suggests?
Well, I think he is taking some of the wind out of the sails of consumer demand. I think that seems to be clear, and no surprise, given the hike in mortgage payments again. And of course, housing prices still continue to be quite high, and cost of living generally is just putting pressure on people. But at the same time, there is some indication that perhaps there is other cause for concern, particularly in the real market for goods. So as I've said in previous interviews about the inflationary environment that we are now living in, it has been created primarily through fiscal means, not through monetary means. And so to the extent that we, with that fiscal policy and with the shutdowns that we mandated on suppliers and the disruption to economies around the world that created, that we have increased the real prices of goods and services, then that's a real rise in prices. That's not just some sort of monetary thing. And so you can't really fix that with increases in the cash rate. So there's only a portion of the inflation problem that the RBA could potentially adjust with its monetary policy instruments.
Well, yes, fiscal policy. Obviously, state and federal governments have been spending like drunken sailors, and that is, in fact, a lot of the reason for this problem, as you suggest. Where do you see the economy now going?
It's really hard to say. I can tell from the statements in other areas that the government is very keen on getting getting immigration back up to the levels that we were seeing previously to COVID. And I think that's spurred by the skills shortage and by the sense that we need to do something about the moribund labor productivity levels that we've seen. At the same time, some of those productivity problems are rooted in bad habits that developed over or took real root during the COVID period. And it's really hard to get people to kick out of those habits. If you think about where innovation comes from, it often comes from people getting together and working on a problem in person, like at an office or at a lab or something. And so that's not happening as much now. I have the sense in the economy, a lot of people are just treading water. They're not looking to invent or innovate or risk take or try new things because we just have this kind of sad outlook. People are a bit beaten by what's happened over the last few years. They're kind of just down in the mouth. They've lost a bit of their mojo. That's not an environment in which productivity is going to go racing off. So I think immigration is one of the tools that the government is hoping may help to ameliorate that. But of course, the more immigration we have, the more pressure on housing and other kinds of services, which of course is going to then even more fuel the cost of living problem. And so again, we have a bit of a rock and a hard place problem for the government in that regard as well.
Yeah, well, it seems to me the mass immigration policies and the number of people we're taking in now is just insane. It's a Ponzi scheme, it seems to me, quite often. But one more thing. Philip Lowe, the Reserve Bank governor, has been demonised in the media. I see TV hosts standing up to give him what for, like he's personally ruining Australians just for the laugh of it. He doesn't understand their pain. I see politicians, Labor politicians attacking him, Greens politicians attacking him like it's all his fault. I also see, in fact, the crowd being whipped up. There's a crowd outside the Reserve Bank hurling abuse, etc., etc. Some people might say, well, after all this, it makes sense that Philip Lowe, given that he doesn't know if he's still got a job after September, might have gone soft so to placate the critics and the government. What do you make of all that?
Look, I can't say that that wasn't any part of his reasoning, and I'm sure that one of the reasons they did not in the statement talk about what was going to happen in the future is the recent scapegoating of Philip Lowe about the fact that he allegedly lied to people back in 2020 or 2021 when he said rates wouldn't go up until 2024. The man does not have a crystal ball, and I see the last few weeks of this scapegoating as basically a witch hunt. It's just that he's the latest victim of the cultural proclivity to try to find people who are to be hated and then to mete out 2 minutes of hate or more than 2 minutes of hate towards that person. And it's really, it makes me despair because our society seems to have lost a lot of its ability to appreciate nuance, to understand economics and the way that the society actually works, to understand the limits to the power of any one individual to create a good society. And the fact that we're really all in this together. And sure, Philip Lowe has his faults, but as I said last week on another program, if we were playing the blame game about what's happened in the last 3 years, Philip Lowe would not be on my top 10 list of politicians or leaders or bureaucrats to be blaming for our present economic woes.
Professor Foster, thank you so much indeed for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks, Andrew.